Today we'll enjoy part of a presentation by Dr. Ravi Zacharias, followed by a music video, One Small Voice for God.
The most telling thing about the cross is the agony of sin and the incredible power of love.
Share the gospel clear and strong. Stand for, claim your heritage of truth.
I'm just happy to be in the Lord's work, speaking at various settings, crisscrossing this globe, covering an awful lot of miles at a time in cultural history when it just does seem as though all of the ideas that are antithetical to the gospel are coming together from the elites of our world, the elite in the media, the elite in the movies, the elite in advertising, the elite in talk show radio, the elite in political thought, and so on. All of them coming together at the same time, setting their sights to somehow obliterate whatever remains of the gospel message. That is particularly true in the West today, even though other parts of the world we see God moving so mightily. Here we see a challenge, incredible hostility. After 40 years of crisscrossing around this globe, I do not remember when such antagonism has been evident in settings here in North America. But a few weeks ago, I was in an Ivy League school speaking at the university. I had never seen such vitriolic language, such anger to stop whatever was in store. I was going to be speaking there for a couple of days, I guess, and all kinds of assertions, allegations made that were totally false, unsubstantiated. Suddenly, in an academic setting, you'd want to substantiate what it is you're actually saying. For the first time in 3 decades of ministering here, 3 to 4 decades, I actually had to walk into an Ivy League setting here in North America with a bodyguard beside me. A 300-some pounder who was going to be walking me onto the platform. And the one thing that all that hostility did was once again pack out the auditorium, even into overflow rooms. It does a wonderful thing to bring all the critics and all the heavyweights out, and they are somewhat in a bit of a daze afterwards when they realize that the gospel does make sense. But what is it that has really happened? Let me position this with the word of Scripture in the background, and that's from Psalm 11. In the Lord I take refuge. How then can you say to me, flee like a bird to your mountain? For look, the wicked bend their bows. They set their arrows against the strings to shoot from the shadows at the upright in heart. When the foundations are being destroyed, what can the righteous do? When the foundations are being destroyed, what can the righteous do? As you see these arrows coming from the shadows set against the upright in heart. It was in the late 20th century, 1980s, where I remember reading these words. I seem to recall it was a Canadian author that wrote it, but not been able to track down the original source. Here's what he said. In the 1950s, kids lost their innocence. They were liberated from their parents by well-paying jobs, cars, and lyrics in music that gave rise to a new term, the generation gap. In the 1960s, kids lost their authority. It was the decade of protest. Church, state, and parents were all called into question and found wanting. Their authority was rejected, yet nothing ever replaced it. In the 1970s, kids lost their love. It was the decade of meism, dominated by hyphenated words beginning with self, self-image, self-esteem, self-assertion. It actually made for a very lonely world. Kids learned everything there was to know about sex, forgot everything there was to know about love, and few had the nerve to tell them that there was indeed a difference. In the 1980s, kids lost their hope, stripped of innocence, authority, and love, and plagued by the horror of a nuclear nightmare. Large and growing numbers of this generation have stopped believing in the future. Whoever it was, he or she who penned these words, ended at that time in the 1980s, how kids had lost their hope, stripped of innocence, authority, and love, and plagued by the horror of a nuclear nightmare. Large and growing numbers of this generation stopped believing in the future. I added this postscript for the 90s. In the 1990s, kids lost themselves, trapped in a virtual world of their own, away from voices and from touch. They talk and feel now in cyberspace, having personalized objects and absolutely subjectivizing reality. Lost alone in their own private world, they have given personality to objects, and so subjectivized reality that the entire panorama of objective truth is now reduced in this postmodern world to what I think, how I feel, and how I can strip this world of truth, meaning, and objectivity and still lay claim to be right. What are the foundations that God intended for us to live by? The first is the dimension of eternity. I want to bring to you 4 pillars here, or 4 dimensions. You've got essence, accountability, conscience, and lastly, charity, beneficence. Existence, essence, conscience, and beneficence. Ladies and gentlemen, however we may react with disgust and anger, we have no right to react without love. The most telling thing about the cross is the agony of sin and the incredible power of love. We are called to love people and despise habits and proclivities, but people still merit our love. And it is our privilege before God to reach out in love in this generation and at this time. You know, you can go to Molokai in Hawaii, where Father Joseph Damien built a place for the rescue of people with leprosy. He left Belgium and went into Molokai to work with the people with leprosy. After years and years, after building the chapel and preaching to them every day, every morning, he took a kettle of boiling water and poured it into a cup. The water swirled out, fell on his foot, till one day he realized when that happened, he had no sensation, no feeling. He knew what had happened. He'd contracted leprosy himself. None of them knew why he began his sermon with different words. Every day he began by saying, "My fellow believers." This morning he began by saying, "My fellow lepers." Shortly after that, when he passed away, totally deformed in his face and features himself, they buried him in Molokai. There's a marker there, but when we visited Molokai, the man told us he's not buried here anymore. The Belgian government demanded that one of their heroes be sent back. But they took his hand or his arm at the request of the people, saying, "Could you please at least amputate that and put that in the burial soil here, because that's the hand that reached out and touched us every day." The love of God, the reach of Christ, what God is doing globally now through his message is actually incredible. I was in Oxford just a few days ago, and a writer for one of the major news, well, his article is about to be released, although The Economist doesn't have a byline. In July, early part of July, his article is on the intellectuals in China that are now responding to the gospel. I want to close with 2 applications, if you'll allow me to, please. And it is important that you hear the first, and then I'll follow it up with the second. Some years ago, I was in Ramallah in Israel, and I'd been part of a peace mission with the former Archbishop of Canterbury. There were about 5 of us that he'd invited. We were talking to the Israeli leaders, we were talking to the Palestinian leaders, especially the clerics. And this one day was a very hostile conversation with one of the 4 founders of Hamas. His name was Sheikh Talal. We met with almost anybody who was anybody in the leadership, and this was the last day in a smoke-filled room. Talal, who'd spent many, many years in prison, lost some of his own children, I think, to suicide bombing, whatever, clenched fist arguing his point. And after these hours of it, the Archbishop looked at the others of us and said, would you be able to ask him just one question, no more than that, one question per person? I won't tell you what my question was because it was in a private gathering, but I asked him the question and I didn't like his answer. And I looked at him and I said, Sheikh Talal, you and I may never meet again, but I want you to hear this, and I want to say it with all the sincerity in my heart. I said, not far from where you and I are sitting, 5,000 years ago, a man you respect and I respect, by the name of Abraham, took his son up a hill to offer that son. Remember that story? He said, yes. I said, let's not debate which son it was right now. Let's just agree he took his son. And as he goes up and the axe is about to come down, God stops that arm and says, stop. He said, that's right. I said, what did God say? He didn't know. So God said, I myself will provide. He said, that's right. I said, Sheikh, very close to where you and I are sitting, 2,000 years ago, God kept that promise and took his son up that hill, not far from here. And this time the axe did not stop. I said, Sheikh Talal, you and I may never meet each other again. So what I want to say is this: until you and I receive this son God has provided, we'll be offering our own sons and daughters on the battlefields of this world for position, power, land, and prestige. Until we receive his son, we'll be offering our own sons and daughters. There was pin drop silence in the room. The Archbishop said, it's time to go. So we're walking, and I was about to go down the stairs, and I thought, boy, I'd really blown it. The Archbishop put his arm around me and said, Ravi, that was of God. I said, I sure hope so. So I walked over towards my car, and since the Archbishop was the guest of honor, and Sheikh Talal was ushering him, but before I got in, I saw him suddenly running towards me. I thought, that's it, finished. I'm going to be here, part of the soil and of Allah. He was a strong guy. He twirled me around. And he just stared at me, patted both sides of my face, kissed me. And then he said this, Mr. Zacharias, you're a good man. I hope you and I will meet each other again someday. And I could just sense that emotion in his eyes as he hugged me and left. Ladies and gentlemen, until you and I recognize that that gospel message is the only message with the power to transform the human heart, we will not meet the need of this generation. How we present it is going to be key. You're all in the publishing industry, one form or the other. Let me close with this and encourage you. I was speaking at the invitation of leaders in Bahrain on the issue of violence and asked if I would address that issue. So I said I'd do it under one condition: I get to give the title. I said, violence, our answers or God's answers, something to that effect. In the audience there were many young people, and one of them was a young boy who came up to me afterwards and said, can I have your email ID? When you're in Bahrain, you have to think very carefully. Why? You're giving your email ID. I said, why do you want it? He said, I have many questions. I said, will you promise to keep it to yourself? He said, yes. Next day I get this letter from him. Dear sir, this is Abraham from Bahrain. We just met last night. I honestly want to tell you that your speech was absolutely awesome. I've been an admirer of your ministry since the time I first heard you speak in Bahrain in 2003. I was only 5 years old then. Now I'm 14, and I've finished reading all of your books. The Real Face of Atheism, Lotus on the Cross, Jesus Among Other Gods, Sense and Sensuality, The End of Reason, Why I'm Not an Atheist, The Grand Weaver, Walking from East to West, etc., etc. They made a great impact on my life and my way of thinking. I really wanted to get your email ID, and I sent an email request to RZI. I'm asking for it, but I've not received a reply for more than a year. Thank you for giving me your ID yesterday. I've also heard many of your tapes, like Barriers to Belief, Absolute Truth in Relative Terms, A Fish Out of Water, A Life That Lost Its Focus, What Happened After God's Funeral, which is one of my personal favorites, The Haunting Spectre of Guilt, Though the Fig Tree Does Not Bud, The Lostness of Man, Who Are You God, etc. Sir, I know you may feel this is all pretty hard for a 14-year-old to digest, but honestly, I love those messages. I saw the DVD of you speaking at the University of Michigan in the Q&A session. So thank you very much for the wonderful impact you made on my life. I'll always remember to pray for you in your ministry. May God bless you abundantly and give you a long, long life. I remain yours faithfully, Abraham Matthew, Bahrain. Keep doing what you're doing. You never know who is reading it in the quietness of their own life and the change that God is bringing. I flew to Bahrain this December without telling him, surprised him, met with him and his father. I hear from him also regularly, including yesterday. Here is a genius in the making, touched by the power of God. Your books, your works make a difference. I want to thank you for standing with us, and we are both for the same cause, helping bring answers to a world that is greatly in need. We do it with love and with truth, and we make sure it has relevance. God bless you. Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity of speaking.
You think you can't make a difference in this world that's all messed up. You're just one insignificant soul. How can one voice be enough? Be one voice loving Jesus among those who hate his name. One song of praise to God in a land where idols reign. One melodic note of truth in a cacophony of lies. One telling of the gospel to a soul with empty eyes. One voice makes all the difference when there's no one else to speak. One small voice for God can bring a sinner to his knees. In the power of Jesus Christ, one voice will suffice. Be that one small voice for God. Corruption, suffering, and cruelty make you feel like giving up. You can't save every person on earth. Helping one might be enough. Be one small